Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. Thank you for being here. Hopefully, you'll stretch a bit. We have a very short panel. Hello, David. Good to see you. You know I like to do shout-outs. My name is Bill Pascrell III, affectionately known as BP3 in the industry. And although I'm not the smartest or brightest ship in a port, I like this panel because, like me, they bring passion to the table. So join with me in welcoming a very, very exclusive panel with massive experience and knowledge that we need to hear in the industry globally today. Daniel Graetzer, founder and CEO of Carousel Group. Let's hear it for Daniel. Christine Lewis, sponsor of this event, CEO of Bombay Group. And I have to fully disclose the next guest speaker. His company has been a client of mine for 14 years, formerly GVC, now Entain. Please welcome the Director of International Regulations for Entain, Mr. David Foster. Hello, David.
Hi, Bill.
Daniel, Christine, and David, you'll permit me to stand. I can't sit. This panel, which is going to be very efficient, we have about 30 minutes, is back to a volatile future or global opportunism outlook. Has the multi-decade experience of iGaming growth, which has been extraordinary, come to an end? Or are we going to see it able to sustain not only in established, mature markets, but in emerging markets like my home country? Daniel, permit me again to say this. I spoke at a conference 14 years ago in London. I'm not allowed to say the name of the conference because I wouldn't do that to iGaming Next. And I said something that a lot of people thought was dodgy, but that's okay, because I like to be utterly transparent and give people a gut punch. The European market, which has been established for decades, is mature, sophisticated, and oftentimes innovative, but perhaps not innovative enough, is really, I believe, the mecca, the core of the industry. However, most, not all, iGaming companies, B2B, B2C, whatever, from Europe don't have a clue about the US market. Equally, the operators in the US, which have been predominantly land-based, don't have a clue about iGaming. They understand the politics, perhaps the regulatory regime, but they have a lot to learn. And I think the day is coming, and I really want to hear these three experts, because I am not an expert in investments and in the future of the market. I'm a regulatory gaming attorney based in the US, formerly only land-based, and then brought iGaming to America, thanks in great part to PokerStars and formerly GVC, now Entain. So the first question. We know that we're in the thrust of a recession. What does that mean? I'm not quite sure, because I've been hearing this word recession in America. We see what the stock markets have done and markets across the globe. But what do we believe that onset, or perhaps we're in the middle of it, impacts in terms of valuations, investments, SPACs, and the like? David, Daniel, I'll kick it to you first.
Thanks, Bill. I was going to call you Bruce Buffer there for a while, so
thank you. Thanks.
I think it's important to kick off this part of the conversation by separating out these two economic worlds that we're living in. One is consumer behavior and consumer economics, and one is kind of the macroeconomics, investment behavior. You refer to SPACs. I think it's a really interesting conversation path we could probably head down, and the coming and going of the rise of SPACs. It seems pretty clear that as we look around global markets, the consumer behavior seems to be pretty standard, if not growing. You know, you were looking at registration numbers and bet placement, and I mean, look how amazing this football season was. American football season was. You know, just sets records time and time again. But then you look broader and you look at the deal flow happening in the M&A space, and then you look at the SPACs and the uncertainty and the amount of redemptions that's been in that space, and you look at the kind of restriction on capital coming into the market in general, and you go, well, there's two worlds here. I think they're probably destined to collide somewhere in the middle as valuations come down maybe a little bit to reality, but also the growth and acceleration of some of these new and emerging markets, like the US, have such a long way to go. It is still in such early stages. You look at emerging markets still in Asia, look at Brazil, look at Finland, look at Europe. It's still got a long way to go. So there's plenty more steam in this engine. But what happens over the next 6, 12 months with valuations and inflation and consumer spending? Maybe we should look into a crystal ball.
Christine, what is Bombay and your organization thinking about the future? Is there opportunity? Are we hedging against what's happening globally in the markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Daniel, but I also think from a Bombay perspective, it's about having that sort of localized offering, irrespective. I think it's very much about catering for US and European markets, but being very localized in terms of the product. I think that's very key for Bombay.
Yeah, thank you. David, you're a phenom with regulation. I want to tee up this question. We need your insight. We've seen and heard from Christine and Daniel, and obviously all aware of inflation, the war, cost of living crisis, perhaps, with many countries. Talking about a recession, we also have regulation, which, at least in Europe, is making operations harder and harder and more costly, I know personally. With even many of the most well-equipped companies. We have Gen Zs who are smoking less, drinking less, and perhaps gambling less. What do you think can be done by the industry collaboratively? Because we know your company's a leader globally in RG, for example, which is not putting a lot of profits on the bottom line. It's costly to do. What do you think the industry needs to do to collaborate, to get regulations more aligned?
I think the word you said there, collaboration, is crucial. I think, if you go back 10, 12 years, when the growth outlook for the industry was a little bit more straightforward, then companies could afford to go their own way and try and make a fast buck. But obviously where we are now, for the macroeconomic reasons, but also the regulatory environment that you just alluded to, it's a lot tougher out there. It's definitely, I think there are still opportunities out there, but companies are going to have to work a lot harder and be a lot better at what they do. And regulation is definitely part of that as well, particularly in Europe. And I think we've seen the industry really step up in the last couple of years and really take this far more seriously. I think previously there was a bit of lip service probably paid to it, but I think there's a real genuine commitment and clear, tangible outputs now to kind of demonstrate the industry is putting its best foot forward. So I think a more mature approach will help the reputation of the industry, because policymakers, regulators, the media, the general public, they don't perceive individual companies. They think of the industry. And I think as long as we can kind of collaborate more effectively, and the bigger, more advanced companies maybe dragging up standards and taking some of the, tier 2, tier 3 players along with them, then I think the whole ecosystem stands to benefit. And you're only as strong as your weakest member, really. So I think it's all well and good. A number of initiatives that some of the larger companies in more mature markets have have kind of come out with, and the real focus on ESG and sustainability, RG, etc. But you know, if there's other companies who are simply ignoring all that, still fly by night, chancing it, then you know they kind of jeopardize the progress that the rest of the industry is committed to. So I think definitely collaboration is an important part of being able to kind of you know, tackle those challenges head on.
And what do you think are a couple of priorities in terms of regulations that we can be pursuing collaboratively? We know we're talking particularly in the US market about self-regulation to prevent what's happened in lots of Europe on RG. But what else is going on that you think we can be ahead of the curve on, particularly in these tough, challenging times in the markets?
Yeah, well, you know, I think a discussion that's becoming more and more prevalent in Europe is around affordability. And it's still quite a broad term. There is not a kind of a very clear consensus on what affordability looks like. We obviously have, you know, certain jurisdictions that have put in place quite draconian affordability measures. You know, Germany, for example, with €1,000 spending limit. Belgium has a €200 a week deposit limit. And obviously in the UK as well, it's a live subject at the moment for the white paper, which is obviously still pending at the moment. Slightly unclear outlook on what the direction of travel will be there, but that is a key issue which the industry is kind of grappling with. And if we can come up with a broad consensus and something that is, you know, acknowledging that this is going to have a hit on profitability, this is going to have a negative impact on bottom lines for certain operators in Europe, but at the same time acknowledging that there is a need for, you know, that safety net protecting the most vulnerable players. And if we start by focusing on the most vulnerable players, and then we can iterate going forward to come up with a model, I think we're in a better position than if we go all in at once, you know. But this is the challenge, is that because of the perception of the industry in certain markets, we run out of you know, politicians particularly have run out of patience with the industry, and they're going, right, that's enough, here's regulation, it's going to look like this, we don't care about evidence, we don't care about the data, you know, this is public perception, we're making a political decision, this is what it looks like. If we can wrestle back some initiative and say, actually, guys, come on, let's work together on this, let's come up with something that actually genuinely supports consumer protection without, you know, creating additional incentives to go to the black market or hobbling companies, then, you know, we'll be in a far better position. So that's the core challenge we're facing at the moment, I think.
Oh, thank you, David. Christine, you are a person in very, very high demand. I know that many clients of mine scrap to get the opportunity to have a cup of coffee with you. I know there are many in the room that are more established companies, but there are also quite a few startups. I happen to have an emotional connection to startups. I think they tend to be more innovative than the more established brands. Tend to be. It's not axiomatic. But could you please share with us what a startup needs to do to impress you enough to consider investment?
Excellent question. I think from a startup perspective, you know, it's very much about the pace, the fast pace operationally. We're very, very driven to deliver, and it's very goal-focused in terms of, you know, our product deliverables. So it's a fun environment. But I also think there is that opportunity to, you know, really scope and understand what's in the market, what's in the industry today, and obviously learn from that, and then be able to feed that into our product as well. So yeah.
Does it matter from your company's culture and perspective and priorities if the company seeking your counsel and investment comes from a black or gray market? Does that matter?
Can I come back to that one?
Yeah. You want to think it?
Let me have a think about that one. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I've asked a good question.
Good question.
First time in my life, Daniel. Daniel, what are you focused on these days? And listen, I know, and you're the absolute gentleman, consummate gentleman. You never brag about yourself, which you should, but you don't. And you also don't brag about your various companies. Talk a little bit about what Carousel's going through right now, both in established markets that you've been in for a bit and in emerging markets, so that perhaps folks in the audience can learn from your experience.
Look, we made the very conscious decision as soon as PASPA was repealed that the US is the holy grail, right? And we have pivoted the entire business. Carousel was just a little startup group with some ambition to be a multi-brand, multi-jurisdictional operator. And we looked long-term and thought, you know, we like a good fight. We think maybe we're a little bit late, but we're also still a little bit early. And, you know, we've focused our entire business just on the North American opportunity. I want to kind of tie conversation into something you said earlier now. Let's have a chat. So you said kids these days, let's talk about, you know, of adult age, drinking less, smoking less, gambling less. I think also, I don't necessarily agree with that. Maybe I hang around with the wrong kind of kids. I think the consumer behavior is changing massively, and I think there's a huge opportunity to either get on board or get left behind. And particularly when we look at North America, it's around entertainment, and it's about spending behavior, and it's about that I see sports betting in the future in online casino or iGaming as competing with entertainment dollars, right? And to tie this into a conversation about a global economic shift, I think we'll start to see some interesting behaviors come. Let's presume interest rates keep going up, spending starts tightening, young homeowners start getting squeezed. It reminds me there's an economics paradigm or study called, I think it's called the lipstick economy or something along these lines. And I think it refers to in the 1930s, at least someone can correct me, when there was one of the, I think, 1930s recession. People had very little money, but people still want to feel good. They still want to entertain themselves. They still want to spend something. And lipstick sales went through the roof. Very cheap. You can buy it easily, and you can feel good about yourself, right? And I think about that all the time. And I think when the economy starts to look going through a phase like it's going through, how much entertainment can we offer safely and at the right price point that is enjoyable and people can do it sustainably and safely? And I think that's where sports betting and casino can come in really, really well if done properly and if done safely and regulated and done by the right operators. And I think that's the opportunity looking forward, is getting ahead of a potential economic shift, getting ahead of potential consumer pattern changes and nailing that entertainment piece, right? It is all about entertainment for us. We're building a lifestyle brand in the US. For us, it's all about experiences. It's all about loyalty. It's about what else can you get out of your brand? And for us, you know, while I'd love to have, you know, VIPs throughout the whole sports book, I believe there's a huge untapped segment out there of recreational players that will really enjoy having cheap and fun and safe entertainment, and I think that's the opportunity.
It's interesting actually that we package up smoking, alcohol, gambling, you know, from vices, particularly from a regulatory perspective. But I think gambling is slightly different for the reasons you just mentioned, Daniel. If it's increasingly part of a broader entertainment package and it's been it's interlinked with all sorts of other products, and from video gaming, from different types of payments, from different digital experiences, I think there's still not. There is a different stigma associated with it. I think that alcohol and smoking probably have, particularly for the younger generation, because they've seen the health implications that can have. But I think if it's wrapped up in a broader entertainment package, which most of the younger generation are all engaged with already to some extent, I don't think it's going to suffer in the same way. That might be wrong, but I think my kind of expectation would kind of align with yours.
Yeah, like let's take sports for an example, right? Sports, for as long as I can remember, only went away for a very short period of time. And what happened then? Well, I was watching marbles being raced on YouTube, and I was watching Eastern European table tennis. Like, we need sports. Sports isn't going anywhere, and the sports betting environment can add that extra level of engagement and entertainment to the sport. So I think no matter what the economic outlook, as long as sports is around, sports betting will be around, and as long as people can deliver an experience that's the right price point and the right levels of safety to be able to do it responsibly through those periods, I have zero negative outlook on the future. Unfortunately, it's going to be a tough time, but I think our industry is somewhat recession-proof.
It's incredible. I was very nervous at the start of the pandemic. Really didn't fully appreciate what was going to unfold. 97% of every bet placed in America on sports legally was placed online. We know that the US model is quite different from most of the rest of the world. We did it for a political expediency when I was lobbying it. Both online gaming and online sports betting are mandatorily tethered to the land-based, except for Tennessee, because they don't have any land-based. This is open to anyone, but what do you think about that model? And the reason I asked the question that I think is relevant for as many people who have come up to me last week when we were in beautiful Spain and this week in beautiful Malta that say they want to get into the US market. The first state in the nation to pass legislation and regulations for online gaming was my home state of New Jersey. And I was working with David's company and Poker Stars to get that accomplished. That law sunsets in a year. It's a 10-year law. I haven't heard anybody in the industry, and I've sent that out to them, that really cares to comment on it because they think it's axiomatic, it's going to be re-upped. The bill was dropped for another 10 years. All the complaints from both GVC at the time and Isai Scheinberg from Poker Stars about the tethering, now's the time to have that discussion. I guess there's too much partnership and pressures and contracts, but it'd be a good conversation to explore because you don't see that in many, many other parts of the world. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know, David, you're predominantly focused in outside the US, but you have to have an opinion on it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think if there is an opportunity to engage in a meaningful dialogue with regulators on something that's significant, then for certain operators that's going to be an interesting proposition. But I think the point you make about partnerships and already having established ways of working does make that a little bit difficult. The US model is so different from the traditional European model that there is that added level of complexity because of those requirements to have those land-based partnerships. And they took a long time to get off the ground. There's been a huge amount of investment in them, as we know. And to kind of unravel that or unpick that is, potentially a bit tricky when we're already at an early stage in the kind of life cycle. So, be careful. I think if you were going to, have that discussion, I think you need to think carefully about your specific business model and your operating model, because it's not, certain companies will be more suited towards going their own way potentially than others. So yeah, an interesting one, but tread carefully would be my kind of advice, I think.
Where do I start with this one, Bill? I've been in the industry for maybe almost 20 years in various countries: Australia, Spain, South America, Asia,
Since
Europe.
you were 15, huh?
Yes, I'm that young. I felt like I'd seen a lot of regulation around the world. I had close relationships with the Spanish regulator, with the MGA here, UKGC, etc. And I went with it as a real eyes wide open into the US, thinking that all of my wonderful experience and I could help impart that upon some of the regulators. And I sat down with, some of the guys you probably know very well up in New York when they were working out the bills there. And I realized very quickly that I'm going to take a backseat to lobbying in the US. I look at Florida, I look at California, look at New York. There is a giant boulder rolling down a hill that is being pushed by both the tribes and the land-based casinos and the big, well-capitalized giants, and I'll sit in the back seat, and whatever they do, I will do my very best to make sure we can build an amazing business in the wake of that lobbying action. But there's so much money in that industry right now, it is too big to fail, and I would say it's probably also too big to change.
Yeah, that's a shame, but I understand. I totally get it. Why you would perhaps focus more on things you have control over as opposed to spending time, money, human resources, and others on trying to educate, advocate, and lobby. But your voice and similar voices are needed to become a part of the conversation. It's crazy to me that there's no online gaming association in America. That's insane. That's why we have a 51% tax rate. And New York has become the socialist gaming empire of the world. At 51%, they essentially own the book. It is just extraordinary to me. You talked a little bit earlier about the convergence between hospitality and the industry, and perhaps we could talk a little bit about media. I had the privilege to be invited by the National Restaurant Association of America and the National Hoteliers of America to Sun Valley, Idaho, which I had never been to before. A beautiful place to visit, and spoke to C-suite folks like you, Christine, about the benefits of gaming to the hospitality industry. And I was amazed at how little knowledge there was from very, very smart, successful executives who haven't even given a think about how to complement their current offerings with an overlay of gaming. And perhaps that's still to come. We're getting close to wrapping, have about 4 or 5 minutes here. I want to shoot, I think, an important question. As we've talked a lot about all the current external challenges to the industry, like the war and inflation, perhaps recession, cost of living crisis, who are going to be best served? And Christine, if you don't mind, I want to go to you first, because you have this. Christine is so lovely because she has all this experience, but she doesn't speak on stage a lot. So just give it a go. You can do this. I want to know whether it's beneficial for the big boys and girls, or the startups and the moderates. Are they better off taking a step back like Daniel has done in lobbying, but in terms of being more aggressive in the market now? Or should they peel back? Who's going to benefit? Which approach? In this uncontrollable world of pandemics and wars and inflation that we never thought we'd see in our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I think, personal opinion is to be a bit more, aggressive in terms of, but I think I'll go back to what David mentioned at the start in terms of the collaboration. I think there's a lot more collaboration we should be doing, end-to-end suppliers, operators, regulators, and also, you touched a little bit on the sort of hospitality. I think, it's starting to look at where those opportunities are and thinking outside the box and exploring and collaborating a lot further.
I think from my perspective, it depends on your risk appetite. I think there is plenty of companies out there who, this current scenario with tighter regulation, difficult macro environment, is going to present them with opportunities. And if they have a 2-3 year time horizon, they just want to cash out, get bought or something like that, then they might be in a good position to be aggressive, to kind of grow ahead of market, get themselves in the shop window and become acquired. And if that's their objective, then that's it's a good environment for them. But I think a company like mine, which has a far more sort of longer term sustainable outlook, I think, this kind of feeds into this more mature approach. And we're already seeing this in markets like the UK, where we're building in things like affordability models into more embedded in our operations. And yes, they're having a negative impact on revenues, and they make it a bit difficult to achieve that level of growth that we had before. But we're thinking longer term here, and we see ourselves as a consolidator in the industry as well. So maybe we're not going to grow as quickly in the short term, but with a longer term horizon, with the geographic opportunities, the different product innovations, the different sectors that are kind of converging, then there's definitely opportunities for us to be successful, and other operators as well.
Daniel?
Nervous times, but full of opportunity. Cost of capital is higher than it's been for quite some time, and it'll probably continue to get more expensive. Debt is expensive, coupons are expensive. There's nervousness in the investment world. I think now is the time for businesses to prove their worth. and focus on a particular strategy and just nail it. I think many companies should be more risk adverse than they've been for a while. Valuations have dropped, and I think the investment world has started to shift away, especially in North America, shift away from longer term outlooks and future multiple valuations of future multiples of revenue to what is your current EBIT? What are you doing right now? What does your cash flow look like right now? When it comes to an emerging business like ours, like Max and Bet, in an emerging market, in a really huge growth market, we're trying to build value. We're trying to build a unique position. We're trying to show that we are doing things differently. We're trying to stand out from a crowd, and I think everyone needs to do that right now. They need to really understand and focus on their cash position. They need to try and be very smart in a world that with scarcer investment, but still plenty of investment out there. Yeah, and then really focus on, am I building something that's unique and different? Am I going to be around in 5 years? I think it's really exciting times. And I think with all of these challenges comes huge opportunities.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking and giving an applause for Daniel Graetzer with Carousel Group, Christine Lewis with Bombay, and David Foster with Entain. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you later.